So good.
So that was some audio description by Busta Rhymes to a Stevie Wonder music video to get you into the mode of what is audio description. I guess we'll start by introducing ourselves. I'm Chiaretta Lavatelli from the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago.
Sina Bahram from Prime Access Consulting.
Jonathan Munar from Art 21.
And today, I forgot I had a remote. We have a sort of core takeaway that we wanted to share with you. We're hoping that you leave this session with ideas to make better videos for everyone. So that's our goal here today. Hopefully we can achieve it. We're going to do our best to go relatively quickly to leave lots of time for questions. So today we're going to go over some basics of accessibility, so that's captioning. We're going to kind of breeze through that because most people are pretty aware of how that works, and get to the good stuff, which is Jonathan, Munar, and I trying out audio description for ourselves. So let's get to captioning. So there are two forms of captioning, open and closed, and Sina will sort of go over the basics of the importance of captioning for accessible video.
Sure. So captioning is helpful not only from a perspective of if you can't hear, you're going to have the words be available on the screen. And that's not only the words of dialogue, but also, for example, the description of sounds, because sound can convey a lot of meaning. So a door slams in the background, or a car horn can be heard, that kind of thing. But it has a lot of universal design aspects to it, right? If your partner's asleep and you still want to watch something, you can turn the volume down and take advantage of captions. Or if you're trying to learn a new language while the captions there might be just translational for subtitles, it's still helpful. So this kind of medium of conveying information through text over live video is incredibly helpful and a part of universal design. It also can be used when linked correctly digitally against the video as a fantastic way of searching out information. If you're looking for some information about something and the captions are a searchable source, they have time indexes associated with them. So these time indices can then link you to that part of the video. So there's a lot of opportunities for not only search engine optimization, but seeking out data inside of a video. That's fantastic as well.
And just because I breezed by it, does everyone know the difference between open and closed captioning? I made an assumption there, which wasn't fair. Okay, so open captioning is when the subtitles or captions are embedded into the video. So that means that they're not legible via screen reader or anything. They're just pixels on a screen that form words that can be seen and read. So we use this in museum, especially inside exhibitions. So when you have a video on a screen and somebody has trouble hearing, they can read those subtitles and understand the content of the video. Closed captioning is a file that is attached to the video. And this is what is searchable and useful in terms of finding certain points in time. It's also invocable and translatable. So there's a lot more potential with closed captioning.
There's one thing I'll add to that as well, which is that with respect to closed captions, having a screen reader be able to read it is really helpful. You might think that's kind of silly because, let's say, if somebody's blind, they can they can hear what's going on. Why would they want access to the captions? But the subtitle example is one case, so that you can watch foreign film and have your screen reader telling you the dialogue. But another case is also if they happen to be deaf-blind, and so then the captions can actually be translated onto a braille display very trivially, the same way that it's done through speech, and that's another advantage of doing it that way.
All right, so
and automated is very bad. So the Google automatic YouTube captions are not the is that you can't end there because that can lead to a lot of problems.
Quality matters. This brings us to the importance of transcription in the filmmaker's process, and so Johnny's going to sort of walk you through why you should be transcribing every interview you capture.
Right. So this is really going to be the theme, I think, that we're touching on a lot. The fact that even when we go through this process of transcription, we're not just doing it for accessibility purposes and, for the blind. We're doing it for so many other reasons. So when we go through the effort of transcribing a video, there's so many side products that are equally as relevant and equally as useful. to the process. So this is just, I actually, for every video that Art21 puts out, I hand transcribe it for the most part, because they're short videos, they're 3 minutes. You know, it's not really worth the time to go out and pay someone and wait for it in the tight turnaround cycle that we have. All this to say that it's, you know, it's quite possible for you to just open up a QuickTime video, open up a text editor, and just go at it, have at it. So transcription, every line of dialogue, but this is transcription in preparation for captioning. So you'll see that even within this video there are, well, maybe not in this one, in other versions, it is capturing, you know, things that are happening in the scene, a glass clinking, you know, a horn honking or anything of that nature. So one of the practical outputs for me during my process is having these transcripts available from a workflow perspective for something as simple as just putting together social media posts. So when I have a video ready to put out via social media, I have a transcript ready to go. So if I want to see the social media post with a quote, rather than having to watch that video and seek for something, I already have this transcript available, and I already know where in the video a particular line is going to appear. So it's preparation, you know, for social media or anything along those lines, a newsletter, or in another case, having an archival version for additional website content. So in this case, this is just an image on the Art21 website that has a quote from the same video kind of complementing it. So, you know, it's further illustration. It's using that archival material to really strengthen the resources that you're already making available on your website. And then, of course, kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, using these transcripts as ways to generate caption files. So it's taking all of those lines of dialogue and feeding them into YouTube. And YouTube has actually gotten so much better at making this process easier for you. To go in there, just upload the text file the way that it is right there, and then it will automatically take a pass at syncing some of that that dialogue to sound, and it's remarkably pretty accurate. I only have to do like minor tweaks, but but for the most part, it's super accurate. So these are hours shaved off of a workflow thanks to systems like this that are available. And then when you have this time-coded caption file that comes out of YouTube, that itself has so many other purposes beyond just being a set of captions on YouTube. You can go into YouTube, and YouTube is going to let you, export the caption file into all these formats. These are very universally acceptable formats on the right side here, VTT, SRT, SBV. You could then take that caption file and then put it into a Vimeo player, for instance, or, you know, if you're going to burn in, you know, open captions for gallery use, you can use some kind of program to merge the caption file and the QuickTime file into, you know, a single burned in video. Not that we'd encourage that, I don't think. Nah. But, you know, having it there is fantastic, you know. And then something that another use for it is, you know, Facebook video is all the rage these days. So even being able to put up a set of captions that was based from that exact video file, exact caption file that came out of YouTube, trimming it and putting it into a Facebook post, to have those captions loaded in there right away. This is not just for folks who are blind. This is for the average user who is scrolling through their Facebook feed, and with the video already automatically muted, captions are coming up, you know. So you're not just selling someone visually, but if you have a strong line of dialogue within that first 3 seconds, having a caption file in there is all the more practical. And again, this comes straight out of that same workflow of publishing caption to YouTube, which is just, it's killing so many birds with just one very large stone. And one thing that we like to do at Art21 is we have this little translation project that we have where it's crowdsourced translations. All of this, again, is based off of that same YouTube caption file where our volunteer translators can come onto this site. We've partnered with an organization called Amara. They can go through those same raw files and just translate away, and then contribute the stuff back into YouTube and back into the ecosystem, the video consumption ecosystem. So, and they're time coded and everything. And then you can have the same kind of purposes. You can export these files and do whatever you want with them. So you have all of this material available to you. I could go on about the translation project, but it's just fantastic. Seeing things like, the same lines of dialogue we saw earlier, having it in Spanish, having Hebrew, it's all quite practical to have it there. And this is now crossing a language barrier, and not just, what you would typically assume captioning to be there for. So we do it all manually, but you could also pay for people to do this kind of thing.
Absolutely. So we're going to be posting the presentation so that you have access to these links. But these are just a few of the transcription services that are out there. Casting Words is a really cheap transcription service. It takes a while to get that cheap transcription back. So we actually use Verbal Inc. because they have a nonprofit discount and they're pretty quick and they're in LA, so you can get stuff in when you think you're too late, but it's not too late if you're in the central time zone. Then there's some other higher end ones. There's also, of course, really amazing companies and professionals that can be hired. And then, of course, you can do it yourself or have an intern help you. If it's shorter material, it's usually faster to just do it yourself. I still transcribe stuff all the time, too. So we also included a link to a resource on styling captions, and so that if you are doing open captioning, you get your fonts right, you get all of the contrast levels properly integrated so that your captions are legible. So we'll be tweeting out a SlideShare link after the talk. Oh, no. Carses, can you click on that? Press
Click
play.
on this video?
Yeah,
Oh.
click on that video. Yeah, so right here you see YouTube. I just did a quick screen recording. It's this video that you're going to see a live description of later. And what I'm doing here is I'm not transcribing, I'm just editing the auto transcription. So YouTube allows you to, so you see the mouse over the screen, and then I click on edit, and now I'm editing text to the right of the screen where you see the video, and I'm taking Alexandre de Cunha and replacing that from the I think it said something of Kenya. So the auto transcription is terrible, but it provides you a basis to edit if you don't want to hand transcribe something. And so this is a sort of last ditch effort if you have a video you made that you haven't transcribed, or you're going back and transcribing videos that you've already produced. So now the mouse is going to the lower right, it's creating a new section to the right of the timeline, and you can see all the same text captions showing up in the timeline, and you can adjust the edges of them so that they sync up with the text, and you can even see the waveform of the audio underneath the image of the video screen that's in sync with your playhead, which is in red, and you can see the progression on the timeline line below the caption, and you can see your captions appear live at the bottom of the frame. Right now you can see I'm trying out something that I haven't run by Sina, which is putting the audio description in parentheticals and trying to have the actual voice, the native voice of the video, the artist being interviewed, not in parentheticals. So we'll see if that's actually accurate. So then you just click Publish Edits, and then you have, it's really legible, I can see, but there's one that says English Automatic and then one that says English. If I click on the English, I can go back and edit it again if I catch a typo. So this is really great because we make mistakes all the time. The other thing that's great is I can add, I can download it, which Johnny showed you, and so that's me downloading an SRT so I can upload it to Vimeo, and that's how we keep all of our Vimeo videos closed captions. And then, let's see, we are gonna, what am I doing? Ha!
Now you're just clicking around.
I'm clicking around. Okay, so let's skip this part.
I don't think we can do that.
Yeah, no, come on, go to the next slide.
Okay.
You can do that. So that was live audio description. I was describing what we were seeing on the frame, and that's sort of the basis of where the idea came from, is that we can do this ourselves. We're able to see what's in front of us, and we can describe that content. So we decided that we would engage on an experiment with Sina and see if we could figure out how to describe our own videos. I don't even remember. Okay, so before we get into the details of our experiment, Sina's going to give you a brief overview of what audio description is and what purpose it serves.
All right, so audio description, as we've heard a couple of examples here recently, and we just saw Anna do it as well, is this idea that as video is going on, as these pictures are moving and things are happening in a scene, you have a verbal track an additional track of audio that is telling you the visual information. And what's key here is that what it's telling you is the visual information, not information that you can ascertain otherwise. So, for example, if it's telling you something like a car door slams, that's not very helpful because you're blind, not deaf. You got that. But who got out of the car? Very helpful. And that's how audio description is generally done. Some practices are things like auto ducking, or this idea that when the audio is playing of this description, the original audio of the movie or of the clip of video is lowered a little bit, and as a result, the description is easier to hear. It's no way blocked out completely or anything. It's just simply lowered a little bit. It's ducked down, and there's this very smooth attack and decay of just ducking it down, quickly raising it back up, and in this way, you can still sort of follow along what's going on in the description in the original movie while still listening to that description. And we're going to see some examples here as well.
Okay.
So should I introduce the example?
Yeah.
All right. So the first one.
So the first one is the logos, and so this is. I need you to press play. This is a sequence of logos that are being described,
now, in
which
a black sky, a sliver of sunlight
is
crosses the
fantastic.
Earth. Rays of light shoot off the continents, and a three-dimensional word orbits the planet, universal. A web address appears, www.universalstudios.com. Now, comic book pages flip past, rapidly showing explosions and punching fists. The drawings disappear, revealing the word Marvel.
In a logo, stars twinkle in the sky. Our view drifts down through clouds to a river that winds past hillsides. A train crosses a bridge. As a flag waves on top of a castle's tallest spire, a bright display of fireworks explodes in the sky. A glowing pinpoint of light arcs over the castle, leaving a trail of sparkling dust. Words appear. Walt Disney Pictures. Another computer-animated logo appears. An illuminated desk lamp hops past the word Pixar, then squashes the letter I. A subtitle appears, Animation Studios. Now, in a logo, stars twinkle in the sky. Our view drifts down through clouds to a river that winds past hillsides. A train crosses a bridge. As a flag waves on top of a...
Okay, so that was to give you a sense of sort of like audio description in its greatest detail, and I'd love to hear Sina talk about it, because I don't think we talked about this video.
Yeah, okay. We should totally talk about that live. So yeah, I mean, basically, this is one of those more informative things, or it's a concatenation of a bunch of different intros to various movies, different movie houses that have had different logos over the years. So it's, I think, somewhat important actually, because it's easy to dismiss stuff like this as the fluff. Why would you do this? Let's just begin with the movie, and the inclusive aspect of this is really important when people make visual jokes about the two spotlights for 20th Century Fox or whatever, or just even reference that. The ability to follow that conversation and participate in that conversation is a really big deal. So having descriptions of things that might seem superficial, or at least might seem, oh, that's not part of the core content, actually does matter. Same for the credits at the end. You're just as curious as anybody else who that particular actor was, or who the assistant to the assistant of the vice director or whatever it was, that kind of stuff. So these sorts of minor details actually sometimes have a profound consequence in terms of inclusion.
And I really love the two different voices that we get to hear, because something that when Sina and I were looking at videos trying to teach me something before I endeavored on the description, was listening to male and female voices, different accents, different pacings, and also use of language. So the Disney one is very soft and cuddly versus the Marvel comics. I just noticed the link is missing for JJ.
Oh, is that one of the QuickTime videos?
No,
Yeah,
it's-
it's really easy to find if you want to just bring up
If you pull up youdescribe.org,
Yeah.
it's the one we couldn't rip.
I don't.
So there's this amazing online resource that is really great if you're trying to learn about audio description called YouDescribe. And it was Sina who introduced me to this resource, but it's got some issues about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a project out of Smith Kettlewell in San Francisco, and it's essentially YouTube, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later, and a lot of other platforms don't allow you to put audio description. They don't facilitate that in their video upload process, and so they force you to just upload a new video with a different audio track, et cetera. And then it's like sometimes actually flagged because it thinks your video has problems because the audio doesn't seem to match the visuals or something. So there's all of these issues that can come up, and so the goal of this project is simply to offer a mechanism by which
Walking
videos
down
can
the
be
sidewalk,
crowdsourced.
a young Thai man gets soaked by
So
a
take a
gutter
listen.
spout. Stepping aside, he moves a scraggly potted plant into the flow of water. When a woman struggles to hoist her vending cart onto the sidewalk, the man helps her push it over the curb. A stray dog finds the man eating at a stall and is rewarded with a piece of chicken. The cook shakes his head. When the man finds a woman and her daughter begging on the street behind a sign that reads, "For education," he gives the little girl some money. Looking on, a store owner shakes his head. Later, the man quietly hangs some bananas off an old woman's. What does he get in return for doing this every day? Later, he finds the potted plant receiving more water. Nearby, the vendor grumbles at the curb. "There you are," she says when the man approaches to help. The stray dog begs for more food, and the man gives him 2 chicken legs. He offers the little girl all the money in his wallet, and the store owner shakes his head again. The little girl bows her head in thanks. On a bus, the man offers a woman his seat, while at home, the old woman finds the bananas on her doorknob.
เขาจะไม่ได้อะไรเลย
He gets nothing. He won't be richer, won't appear on TV, still anonymous, and not a bit more
ไม่มีใคร
famous.
รู้จัก
He playfully helps the vendor with her cart. The man pets the stray dog goodbye, but when he leaves, the dog follows him. Down the street, the man opens his wallet, but finds the mother on the sidewalk without the little girl beside her. "Mom!" The man turns to see the little girl running toward him, dressed in a new school uniform. She stops and grins, and a smile washes over the man's face.
เพราะสิ่ง
The
ที่
store owner looks on, stunned.
คือได้แค่
What he does receive are emotions. The man shares a laugh with the vendor and feeds the hungry
ความ
dog.
สุข
He witnesses happiness, reaches a deeper understanding, feels the
เข้า
love.
ใจ
He prays in his humble bedroom. Holding the bananas, the old woman gives him a hug.
ได้ความรัก
Receives what money can't buy, a world made more beautiful. On the sidewalk, flowers bloom on the potted plant.
ที่สวยงามกว่า
The girl counts with her mother, and the vendor gives a customer a little bit extra.
ในชีวิต
And in your life, what is it that you desire
มาก
most?
ที่สุด
The man sits with the dog at a flower market. Thai Life Insurance. Believe in good. www.thaigoodstories.com.
So, I recall when Sina first sent this as like the good example, like this is what you should be aiming for, and remind us what it was about that description that was so great.
The thing that really gets me about this one, and not all video. Notice there was very little dialogue except for when the girl screamed "mom" in Thai, and there was like one other thing. It lends itself to a longer form flow of audio description, and so JJ in the describer, JJ Hunt up in Canada, he's incredible. I mean, I feel like the emotional conveyance is really key, and the choice of words really matters. You know, things like a smile washes over her face, not she smiles. That's boring. And so you get this emotional link to what the visual language is showing, and it's a narrative just like the story is. Similar with the with Buster describing Stevie's video, right? Like it was this narrative, and then you can make references back, so you don't have to keep saying the full declarative statement of the girl who we saw earlier. You can just reference it like a story, and so that, and coupled with just the intonation of his voice, I thought made for a really good description.
I think that's definitely one of the strengths of that each of these audio descriptions was just as calculated, perhaps, as the cinematography for each of these. That there was and we'll touch on this later, but there was an element of scripting that happened in these audio descriptions that we as filmmakers could even take away something from learning. So that's kind of a nice segue into things we'll touch on later.
You mean touch on now?
Oh, or now?
Yeah. No. So we decided we would try this experiment. We would send each Sina a video and find out what was in the video according to Sina, to figure out what was missing, what we thought was there that maybe wasn't there in the audio, what was maybe missing from the story that was completely reliant on images. So I'm going to go first. So I sent Sina a video that we recently produced at the MCA on a public art project. It's our MCA Chicago Plaza series and Plaza Project series. And I actually couldn't find the email, and I feel so silly for losing this email with Sina's response. But he basically said that there was a man speaking, and that there were these sort of outdoor sounds, these machine sounds, and basically beyond telling that we were outside and that there was an interview with an artist and all the information that artist told us about his work, there was not much of a visual story. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah.
So what I endeavored to do was use these very brief pauses in the video to try and fill in a little bit of that visual information, because most of the video was B-roll. And so to keep us moving, let's just have a look at that video and my attempt to do audio description.
That one is the QuickTime, right?
Yeah. The blue one. MCA Chicago Plaza Project. Alexandre de Cunha, July 2015 through July 2016. We are looking up through a round cement form framing blue sky.
The kind of sculpture I make is mostly made of everyday objects in either found materials or industrialized materials, mass-produced materials or objects that I change slightly and present them in another way.
Zooming out reveals many round openings. We are standing inside a circular cement form looking up.
It starts by me collecting things. Very often I start collecting objects or types of objects that I'm intrigued by or curious about them, and not necessarily all the time they become artworks.
A massive crane lifts cement objects.
Only recently I started working on a large scale. Most of my sculptures, they are made of quite domestic, small-scale objects. I like the idea that I'm basically using the same procedure, the same thinking in terms of found objects, because what they are actually large found objects. And so the method that I use, making smaller works, is very similar to making this on that much bigger scale.
The people working appear tiny next to the objects they're installing in the plaza.
Making it public, it's a different story because you present the work to a different platform. I think the work becomes more vulnerable, so you have less control, and there is this sense of responsibility as an artist interfering in a landscape, in a city. So I find equally exciting and challenging and quite scary because you don't know the responses, they operate in a different way that is not the same as being in a gallery.
Blue sky, sunlight, and shadow through round openings create strange abstract views upward inside the round cement pipe sculpture.
So in a similar way, the historical context with those concrete pipes, the first ones were made in Brazil, and it was a lot to do with seeing this sewage pipes being abandoned, and then they become this sort of incidental sculpture in the landscape. I believe that the context of Chicago and the industrial aspect of the work has a lot of conversations with the city.
Men on a lift secure a third cement pipe into place.
What I basically try to do in all my work is to actually isolate something that it's a banal object and be able to look at that thing that we are familiar but never inspect with more detail.
A rusted metal spiral inside of a cement mixer.
And I find that process very stimulating, to be able to be part of a process, not only making the work, but when the work is still changing and the responses are changing and how people are relating to the sculpture can also change. The weather is going to change, the light is going to change, and it's now just being presented as a fixed idea.
Cement sewer pipes are stacked high in front of the museum to create a 3-story sculpture. A cement mixer painted red, white, and blue is perched on a 2nd-story platform by the museum's front steps. And on the corner of the plaza, a solid disc of cement with 2 circular openings sits on its side, appearing as if it could roll away. These 3 works compose the MCA Plaza project installation by Alexandre de Cunha, the artist we have been listening to.
So that was a mouthful. This is the, sorry, I'm using the wrong thing because I'm trying to, ooh, thanks. Okay, so I've put on the screen the what ended up being the script, which is probably like, I don't know, a 1/8 of the length of the actual transcript of Alexander de Cunha speaking. I broke it out into the snippets that you hear in those pauses. And this is the end rewrite after rewriting many, many, many times to remove many, many words. And I think Johnny will walk you through that script writing process. It's a lot hard. I mean, we knew it was going to be hard, but it's really hard. It was one of the things we realized, because it really is about writing. In such a concise way, and then this lesson that I sort of indicated towards the beginning in Sina's initial comment. As a video producer, I've always taught that sound is the most important part of video, and sound is what drives everything. And I was under this delusion that I was creating sound design that communicated so much information about the image, and it's actually, image is essential for understanding video, and I always thought that sound could tell more than it does.
So my non-existent daredevil superpowers tell me, I think, that Emily has a question about that, actually.
Yeah, how do you know about issues of pacing, and what's like a standard, and what is how do you make language decisions around what's appropriate?
I'll take it.
I was going to say, there's like half of that I could answer, half of that is definitely
So
Sina's.
I'll let you speak to pacing, but with respect to language standards, there's a couple of guidelines that we can share in the link section for various descriptions, different bodies that have done this for many years and have come up with a couple of guidelines. But honestly, there's also a lot of constraints that dictate what you're saying, and some of your word choices, like we've talked about in previous audio descriptions, like JJ's for the Thai life insurance ad, or Anna's in this artist interview, you're constrained in that I have 3 seconds before the next scene starts up, and it's pretty important dialogue, so I don't want to duck over it, and what can I convey in 3 seconds? And so that can affect word choice a little bit, or at least structure, right? The other thing is that it's domain specific. So if you are describing something that is crafted as a science fiction movie, you may use different words than if a similar type of thing occurred, but in a non-science fiction-y type of context, right? So whereas you might just say, I don't know, a lightsaber or something like that, because you're assuming a little bit of a familiarity, and you might describe it a little bit more the first time it comes up, just like defining an acronym in a paper. In another context, if that's out of scope, if it's not a Star Wars type of movie, you might actually describe what it is, a handle with light coming out of it, because you can't assume that level of familiarity from a domain point of view. Does that make sense?
And I'm definitely going to touch on some of this in the example that I used too, because there was a lot of decision making that had to happen when it came down to describing the artists that I work with. But you'll see that adventure in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and at the end of both of these examples, we sort of have a summary of our learnings. So we're each sort of taking away some of our key lessons from the process of trying this, knowing that we're not professional describers. Neither of us have attended any kind of certification seminar or anything. We're just going by the museum way, which is, how can we do this ourselves with the very little resources we have? And is it possible for us to teach each other what good description is and what those language standards are? And so we're really interested in trying to figure out what best practices are, because so frequently our productions leave no space for audio description. Like those pauses just happen to be in that video. Most of our videos, we would have to do, as you saw at the end, description over black. And so what we're trying to figure out is how can we come up with solutions that can be affordable and easy ways to get started, because we know we can do better and we know there are best practices, but what can we do right now to make our content more accessible? So yeah, next one. So the other thing, major learn, if you are going to try and start doing this on your own, practice makes shorter. Learning how to whittle down your language, but also doing several takes. I just grabbed a timeline still of my first take versus my last take. That's me saying the exact same thing, and so I'm getting really fast at speaking, which is really exciting. But also just finding people to work with who are able to speak more quickly or who are really good, have really nice to listen to voices, is probably going to make your life a little easier.
And it's not always that way, right? Like, so you noticed in JJ, he was not speed reading at all, right? But he had a lot more time in which to do it. And sometimes what ends up suffering is that there's this balance. And I wanted to get a lot of information in there. It was an artistic, it was a video concerning art. It had some pieces in it. She really wanted to get those descriptions in. So we have to use time, because we have to use speed, because that's the only way to fit it into time. Whereas with other things, sometimes what happens is you just sacrifice some description. And so if you watch a couple of shows like on Netflix or whatnot, you'll notice they're talking at about this speed, and then sometimes if they need to squeeze it in, they might go to about the speed, and that's about it. So it does matter. Actually, speaking of that, really quick, reminds me that we did forget to I forgot to mention one thing, which was that when we had the example of JJ's, we wanted to contrast that with a not so great example. And the not so great example are situations in which information is edited for some reason, right? Like what we're talking about now, speed constraints, space constraints, but also things like I suppose morality. So, for example, sometimes you'll have, I actually brought this up in a meeting just an hour ago. So, like, you'll have a romantic scene in Game of Thrones, right? Because that happens a lot. And that and violence, right? And so the thing is that you don't get that, right? You'll get something really stereotypical, like she performs a sex act, and that's all you get. And the reason that matters, other than me just complaining about that not being described, is that it actually sometimes does affect the plot. If you don't know that a particular character is gay, for example, because it's hidden from everybody else, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, why is this thing really important that just happened? And it's because the describer was somewhat being prudish, for lack of a better word. That's something that really matters. So think about the audience in terms of, it is supposed to be inclusive, and if you can see it, it's on the table. But sometimes, like we said, you do have to make trade-offs.
Yeah. So to sort of flesh out these lessons, let's see Johnny's example.
Well, yeah. So I thought I was going to be really cool with this and play up my contemporary art cred and go with the Fred Wilson video because Fred Wilson, he's so cool. If you really want to challenge yourself with this, pick a conceptual artist. And if these are the kinds of things that even people who art historians are challenged in describing, try to do it as a non-art historian. You're really going to have a great time describing things like this and things like this. It was a very fun and exciting experience for someone to go through. I highly recommend it. So this is a Fred Wilson video that I sent to Sina to get his take on it. And I appreciate the very unfiltered responses that you gave as a part of it, because, as we are producing these videos, there is a lot that we're not thinking of. There's a lot that we're not considering, especially as it since we focus on visual art, there's a lot that we're not describing.
They both asked me to be mean, by the way, just to put this in context.
Yeah. I mean, I picked the Fred Wilson video. I like the pain.
You're asking.
So here's a few quick takes of Sina's unfiltered. I'm quoting you. You gave it to me. So things as simple as like things that we obviously just take for granted, that we don't realize aren't being described. An entire set of opening graphics. I mean, that's a nice kind of overlap with the logo video, the Disney stuff that we showed earlier, that these opening graphics were meant to set a tone, yet if you can't see it, it's just sound. It's just blips and bleeps, and there's not really much going on. So that alone, was a great lesson to take away. Interesting, that you pointed out what kind of room, or you questioned what kind of room the artist was in, and I think that that actually helped me make a decision further down the line. I tried to address that in some of the description in the first pass of the transcript, and I realized, that's not actually kind of important. If I surround this, surround the audio description with things that are actually more relevant to the story, then maybe that becomes less distracting. I don't know. That was my take on it, but we can see it when we go through it. And then this was the real big one. This came up twice in your response to Sina. The fact that there were all of these kind of blank spaces, no dialogue happening, and that's because it was art being shown. Anna's example was kind of the same thing, that we're letting the pictures kind of tell the story, but reality is that the pictures aren't telling the story if you can't see the pictures. So so some of the takes. So this is what our opening graphics look like in the video. It's just to give a sense of the kinds of things that R21 does. We show artists at work. And so here's just these 3 lines here, 3 lines from the audio description transcript that I wrote, just describing very simply that this is 5x5 grid of images of artists at work. The title card appears at some point over it, and then going right into transitioning right into the first shot of the video. And similarly, when we're talking about describing this artwork, again, it's just this challenge, and I'll touch a bit more on this later on, but this challenge of just describing what's happening on the screen in as few words as possible. And I'll show you, not for this in particular, but other versions of how I got to certain points. So kind of along the lines of Emily's question, this is a scene that shows up in one of the in the video, and gosh, there's a lot to describe there. There really is. I mean, if you're talking about just art historical references, if you're talking about cultural references, 5 busts of the Egyptian Queen Nefertiti, some appropriated image of a Picasso painting, mannequins in museum security guard suits, these are all great pieces of information to describe. And then so I really kind of, as I was trying to attack just describing this scene alone, which ended up being my first pass on this was like 5 paragraphs, because that's how much is loaded in this one image alone. But the one that I really spent a lot of time with was the Picasso on the right, because you start to think to yourself, like, if I'm saying that this is an appropriate image of a Picasso, do I have to describe what the Picasso painting looks like? Do I have to describe anything about the Picasso? How selective do I really have to be? And so in my eventual drafts, or what I considered to be the final draft at the time, I eventually pulled the whole thing out, because I figured that it was just kind of incidental to put this up at the time as a visual narrative. So I know it's not the best approach, but when you're dealing with all this dialogue, that's what you have to make some of these sacrifices. But it was that idea, like, what I came down to is that if I wanted to describe that work, I would describe it as exactly what it is. It's an appropriated image. And Picasso did paint these kind of 2 African masks on the right, and Fred Wilson did place an actual carved African mask on top of the faces of one of those characters. I thought that was enough information, I think, to describe what the painting was. If there was more time, I think there would probably could go into a bit more detail. But it's kind of like trying to get to that point of like, what is this artwork? What is Fred Wilson trying to say? And that's just one perspective. I'm sure that there are people whose job it is to produce interpretive materials in each of your organizations. I could probably provide a better description of all that. So one of the other scenes in here is Fred Wilson's installation at the 2003-2004 Venice Biennale. My first pass at this was really to have about 3 sentences here, trying to get as descriptive as possible. Then I realized, and I should say that I wrote all of this dialogue, all of this this entire transcript before even trying to see if it would fit in. So I just like paused the video, described the scene, and moved on. It was what I initially thought was a waste of time, but actually ended up being a worth it down the line, just to be able to whittle away at something that already exists, going through the entire process of just describing everything, and then cutting it down from there. So this eventually turned into this, one sentence, 8 words really. Quick and to the point, and I think it gets to the point of what the scene was trying to establish for the most part. This was another challenging one, because where do you go from here? So again, I had these very long paragraphs of things trying to describe the fact that these were African wooden masks, that there are kind of worn cloths over the eyes, and French flags and British flags somewhere down the line, the one that you saw earlier on. No way in hell that was going to fit in even a minute of dialogue. So again, I trimmed it down. At this point, I actually tried to read this. So at one point, I got to the point where I was like, I can't just sit at my computer and try to write this without just recording it. So I got like all like, diva in a voice booth kind of thing with headphones on, just, yelling to myself each time I couldn't get something right. There are a lot of just like expletives. I have a lot of expletive tracks.
We all do.
We all have
all
expletive
do.
tracks. It is a challenge, but a worthwhile challenge. So even this was not enough. So after just recording it over and over and over again, I come to something like this. And I'll just breeze through the rest of this. All that to say that there was a lot to deal with. So I'm just going to play the video and let you guys experience it for yourselves. And this is the clean version. This is the radio edit.
Makes me sad.
A 5x5 grid of still images dissolves in and out, showing artists at work in a diverse range of practices. The episode title card appears, Fred Wilson, Beauty and Ugliness. We open on a tight profile view of artist Fred Wilson.
Beauty. I'm really interested in beauty.
We see a dimly lit gallery with dark green walls.
I'm interested in beauty. If you think of beauty as an ultimate visual experience. But I'm also interested in beauty in that it can hide meaning.
3 white classic Roman-style female busts are being lifted by 2 crouching African male figures.
The world is complex, and often we try to separate out all these experiences. This is beautiful, this is ugly. This is a beautiful experience, that's all it is. There is no meaning, or the meaning is not important.
2 African male figures in separate rooms are positioned identically to bare trays. Several red fire extinguishers surround the base of a 3rd figure cradling a candelabra. White tubes connect the extinguishers to the candelabra.
People have to deal with the fact that there is meaning in beauty. There is meaning in ugliness. And so in a lot of my work, if I can, I try to bring out that tension.
In another gallery, with crimson red walls, 4 decorative chairs are positioned to face a wooden post.
The whipping post and chairs is a perfect example because chairs are really beautiful. That whipping post is certainly not.
The black painted post is worn with dents and scratches.
Whipping posts and chairs were from the first exhibition I did with museum collections. Was at the Maryland Historical Society in 1992.
A horizontal beam intersects at arm's height from the base, angled inwards.
It's a very traditional display in a certain way. There's no manipulation of the objects other than their positioning, and that changes the meaning or the relationship or how you think about them. And this is everything that I'm about when I'm working in museums, and quite often.
So I'm going to cut this short because we're running on time, but I will tell you that, goodness, that was just fun. I'm happy to share that link with you guys. to really show you how crazy it was. And you can also tell that there were things that I just had to take it all together. And that's kind of like finding that balance. Like I think that in certain cases it was just Fred Wilson talking about the fact that there is this beauty and ugliness, and illustrating it with just one example I thought was really a nice accompaniment. But there were, of course, takeaways here. So one of the lessons I learned is that this was just a worthwhile exercise in just looking at art. You know, it doesn't matter who you're producing it for. It's just the fact that you are producing something that is somewhat descriptive, you know, that is, and this kind of goes back to, you know, possibly working with educators, you know, within your organization or anyone else who deals with interpretation, that they do this kind of thing every day. And there's information, there's value in just working with them to help produce some of these tracks. For things that are, you know, pushed out into the web. It's this almost an idea of like taking a gallery tour and moving it online in a certain sense. So there's that experience of going through it and trying to describe this work. It even forced me to see things in this work that I didn't even think about myself, you know. It forced me to look more closely at the work, which is always, you know, appreciated as someone who, you know, has to look at art or wants to look at art all day. Not have to. But then this is kind of what we've touched upon earlier, that we as producers can really start to become better at integrating these accessibility practices, you know, in the overall production practice. That when we're producing video, we can think, you know, towards actually leaving maybe a little bit of room for a longer audio description, you know, or maybe, you know, if we're trying to justify putting in a certain kind of scene, then how do we describe that? You know, if we're justifying putting a scene in there, then we have to be able to justify it with some kind of degree of dialogue, audio description as well. So lots of lessons there learned. Let's move on.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap it up. We were going to talk a little bit about distribution methods, but of course we're very ambitious and wanted to cram a lot into very little time, but we are not talking that fast. I'm going to come back to false myths, and just, I wanted to just wrap with saying a little bit about script writing. I think that one of the biggest takeaways was how important writing is to creating video and storytelling. Something that I am really insistent upon with everyone I work with is the writing process. We write all of our scripts. We actually write a script. And so there's a column that is visual information, a column that is audio information, and I keep these scripts being maintained. Anyone who's worked with me knows that I'm really meticulous about going back and adding in information after we've changed the video, because it's really easy as a video producer to go back into the world of just, we're just going to start editing, we're going to cut that up, we're going to cut that, we're going to remove that. But if we maintain this written document to go along with our production, not only do we have all this great material that Johnny referenced earlier, to produce the caption file, to have something that you can print out and hand around to curators, to educators throughout your building, to have something that's very quickly accessed, quickly read, and very easy to edit by just marking it up with a pen. No one needs to know software, right? So what I demonstrate, I sort of start adding in description in the left column, in the visual column, to understand what these images are that are being listed alongside the audio, so that we can start to think about how description can be part of that practice. But let's go back to those false myths, because I think this is a great place to end and open it up for 2 minutes of questions. So I'm just going to read these, and I think we've all talked about what our responses were to each of these, so I'll let you guys trade off responding. If I explain it, it loses its magic, which we think is false because...
well, in the interest of time, I don't think it does. It's been actually magical for me to have gone through this experience with so many people, and what they've always come back to me is, I've experienced this in a new way. I've gotten new meaning out of this. I've been looking at this thing for 20 years, and I never thought about it in this way. So I think it's exactly the opposite.
Johnny, it's impossible to convey.
It is sometimes just very impossible to convey, but that is false. I mean, I think this is an absolute... nothing is impossible, of course, but the challenge is worthwhile. I think, being able to describe it is something that is just going to pay itself back many-fold over and over for all the other things that you're going to produce based on that kind of description.
It's hard and expensive to do. We didn't spend any money on this. It was a challenge because it was our first time, but now I just want to describe all of our videos. I think once you start describing, you want to keep going. So, Sina, it doesn't benefit that many people. Is that true?
Yeah, so again, the the idea here being that there's a lot of benefit here, not only for people who can't see, of which there are an ever-growing population, because it turns out that we're really good with some parts of medicine. So we get older and older, and your eyes get worse and worse. In fact, I'm banking on the population of Japan for all the advancements that will help me, and so, which is great. But here's the thing: I mean, that the act of doing this again actually can start affecting the art as well. So sometimes in videos, for example, not a Hollywood production, but in something that the stuff that these two guys make. They were talking to each other on one of our calls about, hey, next time I do that, I might just leave an extra second in there, and I've got the B-roll for it or whatever, just so I can fit some audio description in. So it actually can start affecting your videos and other things, and I would argue for the better.
And I think that's where we want to end it and open it up to questions, because we want to know if we're actually getting better at storytelling.
I have a question for Anna. So in the opening Stevie Wonder video, you have 3 tracks of information. If you take out visuals, you have the so you have.
Thank you, Chris.
If you take out the visuals, you have 3 tracks of information. One is the music, you have the lyrics, and you have the verbal description. In your video and also in Jonathan's video, you have 1 track of information that is the dialogue that alternates with the description. Do you think it wasn't like it was not practical, not feasible, just bad practice to overlap the description with the dialogue to also kind of convey the overlapping of the visuals and the dialogue?
You just cued a really good point that we did not make, which is that we would really like to write a collective petition letter to Vimeo and YouTube to support multi-track functionality. It's something that no online video player is supporting natively. It's something that has to be configured through your own website using tools like Video.js. So we think it's a really important call to action, and we're going to be tweeting out, once we finish writing the letter, we're going to be tweeting out a link to a petition for museum professionals to sign, because the advantages to doing this are address all of those issues that we have, where that you can have all of those layers, as well as supporting interlanguage dialogue and commentary to be across all of these various circles, as opposed to annexing video of certain types of certain languages to separate areas, to separate videos, to separate platforms.
Intended use also matters a lot. So the idea behind Busta Rhymes doing the Stevie video is that they knew folks would also listen to the track of music on its own, even divorce of the video, just like we do if we can see, right? And so the idea there was that it was a lot more okay to actually duck and do a solid description. I mean, he was basically talking through the whole video. And the reason that was all right is because it was considered this separate piece. Whereas other times with audio description, as we're trying to make an inclusive piece, we want to have that one thing, and that's where multi-track obviously comes into play so well, because sometimes you can then just toggle it on and off, or you can adjust volumes to your own preferences. So the intended use really matters, I think.
Okay, and my point is, it's not it's just a technical limitation. It's not like a sensory overload.
It is in the case of like somebody talking, when they're just talking and you're really wanting to get that content, it's not the greatest idea to talk over them, right? So you really want to try to do it before or after, if at all possible. That's really a goal.
I have a script writing question. Anna, maybe you can bring up your script as an example to, sorry, I'm going to pick at you.
Absolutely. John
So
can see better.
There were
The other one. Yeah.
I'm sorry. No, the first video was black text with really short white.
Oh, the script for the description.
The audio description.
The audio description script.
Yes. You had 2 kind of sides of a spectrum of some of the text that could be in there. So one was very factual, like men on a lift secure the 3rd cement pipe. And then there are other ones where I almost hear the art direction coming across of the people working on tiny text, or the people working appear tiny next to the objects. So you're almost telling me how to feel. And I see that as a spectrum of choice of how you put, what do you do there? So Sina, as what best practices, how do you approach that spectrum?
So context matters, I think, here. So this idea of information, an informational approach versus aesthetic, or different scopes of description. I think unfortunately in video, your constraints are going to override what the ideal decision is a little bit, and that's a pragmatic concern. The other one is what you're trying to make sure the user gets out of this particular piece of content, regardless of whatever functional ability they may have. And so there's an institutional question to be answered there as well. So I'm in a way purposefully avoiding sort of the heart of your question and giving you a fitness metric instead, because I think that it's really different per situation. But I'm happy to talk further with you offline about it.
Sure. I guess one points that I've heard is audio descriptions are not interpretive, is the mantra I've been told. But maybe I'm wrong.
That's, I think, definitely true for the classical approach to audio description, but I think one of the fascinating things about the museum world is that sometimes interpretation is exactly the name of the game, and we need to just understand, again, like what the purpose of that particular video is, and also some other approaches that have been floated around recently in a couple of different meetings I've been in is to do both, to actually have both an aesthetic approach, an interpretive one, and then also a purely dry informative one as well, and then to offer both to the user. But again, now we're starting to get into the technical limitations of that not being possible.
And I would argue, just as a filmmaker, that the to think that an audio description of a camera angle, which is inherently subjective, could be objective is completely insane. Just like, I'm just going to say that.
I think we're out of time. But
Find us.
thank you guys. Sorry for going a little bit
Thank you.
over. Yeah, thank you.